What's up, guys? Dog Polk here, and welcome back to another episode of Pokerhands. And today we're going to change the pace a little bit. I know that we went through a lot of World Series of Poker hands recently. We might even go back to cover a few more of those in the future, but I wanted to move over to some hands I've been looking to get to for a little bit now. In case you guys haven't heard of this, Triton Poker has been making a bit of a splash for some of the high roller events with a lot of familiar faces and pretty high stakes. So on that note, let's go ahead and jump into the action between Andrew Robl and Rob Yong.
So Tom Dwan is going to sit down. Should be some fireworks. On to the next hand. Robl is 3-betting 8-7 suited right away. Rob Yong's got pocket tens. He's going to make the call. Baldwin, king, queen. There's a raise and a 3-bet in front of him. He's going to lay it down.
You've been chirping it all over town, huh? Even Tom Dwan's heard, huh? Okay, good bluff, Rob. Nicely done.
Coming for another round?
Nice, Rob.
Our hand begins at $1 million, $2 million blinds. I'm not joking. However, these are Korean won as opposed to US dollars. Now, the exchange rate here tends to be around 1,200 Korean won per $1 US dollar. So it's about 1/12 of the stakes you're seeing here in USD. The cool thing about this overlay, it actually shows it in Korean won as well as US dollars. So it shouldn't be too confusing for you guys. So let's go ahead and jump into the action. Our hand begins with Wu making a very questionable open here with ace-8 offsuit. And by questionable, I mean bad. One of the first things you learn playing poker is that the weak, middling offsuit aces from early mid position, they're just not very good. And sure, you have a little bit of removal and you do have some equity when you get called, but your playability is going to suck, and if you get re-raised, you're stone dead. The action folds to Robl in the cutoff, who looks down at 8-7 suited, and maybe picking up on this a little bit, Robl decides to go ahead and re-raise to 20 million. Now, in this spot with 8-7 suited, you probably want to do a little bit of folding, maybe a bit of calling every now and then, but 3-betting is going to be the main option you're going to choose. Against tighter players, I'd lean more towards folds. Against looser ones, a little bit more towards raises. And as you get multi-way, maybe you can mix in a call from time to time. But typically, with multiple players left behind you, you don't want to be fighting this all that often. On the button, it tends to be a bit of a better call. If your opponent is loose, and this does seem to be the case, then 3-betting is going to make you a lot of money. You're going to knock the blinds out, and you get heads up versus a very wide range. The button gets out of the way, and now in the small blind, Rob Yong looks down at pocket tens, and things are starting to get a little bit dicey. We're out of position. We're facing a raise and a re-raise. What do we do in this spot? I've talked about this in the Upswing Lab before, but I think out of position in these spots, I really don't mind playing your entire range as a 4-bet. And the reason is simple. Your odds to call preflop are quite bad. You could still get 4-bet by either the big blind or the original opener. So you're not even guaranteeing yourself a flop, and you're going to be out of position at least 3-way if the opener does decide to call. So I tend to lean more towards playing a 4-bet or fold strategy with my entire range. Now, if I was on the button, I might mix things up a little bit more. I do have position post flop. I'm a little bit more likely to try and see some flops, but you're not getting a very good price here pre-flop. So I wouldn't mind just seeing Rob come in for the 4-bet, even though yes, versus another re-raise, he probably has to fold. He would get a lot of action with his aces and maybe kings, and then when he has tens, he can get out of the way. Remember, these guys are 250 big blinds plus deep, so you don't have to worry about, sticking it in with tens here. You just don't have to do that. You can stick to the premium holdings, and you'll be just fine. Anyway, Rob does decide to call here in the small blinds, which is going to set him up for some tough spots later, and now the action's back over to Wu. Wu has a pretty easy fold here with his hand that should have been open anyway. He does fold, and let's take a flop.
Try and bluff me tonight. See what happens.
So Robl picks up a flush draw. He is the 3-better. Can get aggressive and maybe get his opponent to lay down a hand like tens.
We're on TV too.
I love that shit.
30 million. That's about 30,000.
The flop comes Jack 3 deuce with 2 hearts. A bit of an interesting flop here for both players. Rob flops a pretty good flop for pocket tens, all things considered. Yes, there is an overcard, but it's probably the one that he's least worried about his opponent having. And then Robl does flop a flush draw. So both players got some playability here on this board. Rob checks over to Robl, and now Robl decides to bet about 60% pot. I think all in all, I'm not a huge fan of this. I think you should either go much smaller smaller or much bigger, which is an interesting complaint to make, but here's my logic why. If we use a lot of small sizes on the flop, well, then you force the guy that called pre-flop versus the 3-bet to have to kind of, define his range some and maybe fold when he has a few specific hands that miss this board entirely, like maybe something like King 10 of spades or Ace Queen of spades. It's kind of hard for me to tell exactly what this guy would have, but you know what I'm saying, like something like that in that vicinity. Additionally, then he gives himself an opportunity to bet with many of his hands in his range, including his overcards, maybe some of his weaker 3-bet hands as well, but then also get a lot of thin value with his stronger overpairs. Now, if he does want to go with a bigger bet size, the reason I have something a bit bigger than this size is that if you have a hand like aces or kings and you're trying to make this a very large pot, well, you get bigger to set yourself up to be able to bet and jam the river, and really the only hand that can possibly have you beat if you have a hand like aces or maybe kings is pocket jacks. So in this situation, I like to go either a much bigger size or at least a slightly bigger size or a smaller size with a lot of my hands. Now, that's not to say this bet size won't make money. Of course it will. We're betting the flop with a flush draw. You're going to make money. I just think that there are better sizes to construct our entire range with. Anyway, Robl does decide to bet 30 million, and the action's back over to Rob Yong. Now, in this spot, I don't think there's too much to talk about. Really, I think with 10s, you're going to have to float at least one here. Your opponent could have ace king, ace queen, king queen, maybe a hand like ace x suited that just stabbing the flop or has a gut shot, something like that. So you're really going nowhere on the flop. Rob does make the call, and let's take a turn.
Tom, how old are you?
32.
32.
A quick call. The queen is a scary card for Yong. Another overcard.
40.
40 years. Jeez. Just stop pulling those 40-hour sessions, huh?
Action
When
is
you
on
miss those
Robl.
inside straight, that'll age you every time.
That's why I stayed so young.
The turn comes an offsuit queen, and Rob checks once again. Both players unhappy now. Rob sees 2 overcards to his 10s, not great. And then Robl's equity to improve to a flush has gone down substantially. So in this situation, both players not too thrilled with this card. And when Rob checks over to Robl, he now has to make a decision. Is he going to fire again here? And I think all in all, I'd like that play. The reason is that, when you have this hand, when you have these types of flush draws, I typically like to bet twice and look to probably give up some rivers. And my logic is that when my opponent calls, I can still improve to a flush and be able to value bet later streets. I can get them off a lot of middling pairs. And then additionally, if I do brick on the river, well, I would block some of the flush draws my opponent might have that can call, fold. Now, there's a little bit more to think about in this spot, though, which is because Robl does have 8-7 suited, it's less likely Rob has a hand like 8s or 7s in his range. Now, would he call those pre-flop? Hard to say exactly, but it's at least somewhat possible. Additionally, if he bets the turn and gets raised, it's a bit of a disaster, and there are a few hands now that Rob could have that could choose to raise. A hand like queens, a hand like queen jack suited, a hand like solo played jacks. There are more hands in his range that might raise the turn than there would be on the flop. So I think I typically lean a bit more towards a turn bet, but I don't mind a check, which is what Robl decides to go with, and let's take a river.
Check, check.
Hitting all of them.
So Yong will win if he does not fold.
Yeah, try to bluff me again.
100K in the middle. Does Robl want to fire and put Yong on a hand like pocket 9s or pocket 10s? Wow, he's going to bet 60 million. It's about 60,000 USD. He puts Yong on a hand like pocket 9s and pocket 10s. He thinks that pocket jacks, if it was slow playing the flop, would bet this river card. Rob Yong's trying to think, what would Robl bet the flop and check back the turn with? Would he bet a queen on a turn? Would he actually value bet a jack this way?
The river comes an offsuit 6, and Yong checks one last time over to Robl. And now Robl's got a bit of an interesting decision to make. He certainly isn't going to win this if he checks. We all know that. But can he credibly represent strength here by betting the river? What kinds of good hands could he have that would bet flop, check turn, and bet river? That's really what he has to decide. I don't think it's too credible if you bet this river to say that you have any kind of premium pocket pair pre. Aces and kings are going to mainly bet the turn, although maybe once in a while they check back and play a little bit of pot control. And then queens and jacks are both certainly betting the turn as well. So there aren't really many of those hands he's saying he has. Additionally, I don't think he's going to have ace queen too often. I think if he does have that hand on the flop, he's going to go ahead and bet the turn a lot of the time as well, as he's going to be good unless his opponent has pocket jacks, maybe one combination of queen jack suited. So realistically, what does he have? Maybe a hand like king queen suited, maybe a hand like queen 10 suited, maybe a hand like ace jack suited or king jack suited. He's representing all of these thinner type value bets by going for a river bet here. But when we think about it, those are actually all pretty reasonable. He will bet some of those hands or a lot of those hands on the flop, check a lot of those on the turn, and look to go for some value on the river. So now that we have decided he does have enough value bets to bet here, to try and get value, can he bluff? The answer is, of course, obviously yes, and he has to balance that out. And what hands make the best bluffs? Well, usually in the river, when you get check two, you want to bluff with some of your weakest hands that cannot possibly win at showdown, because those are your most efficient bluffs. There's, of course, the idea of card removal, what makes the most sense to bluff with, but it's not the most important in a lot of these turn check, check, river check spots. You can view it a little bit more in a linear fashion. So he's 8 high. That's about as bad as it gets, and it's time to fire. Back over to Yong. You can see, guys, this is the problem when you just flat call this stuff out of position. You get in all these dicey, precarious spots where you have 1 or 2 overcards and you don't know if your opponent has it or doesn't have it. And he can certainly be bluffing. Anyone at this level can certainly bluff other players. But would he bluff in this spot specifically? It can be hard to tell. And that's the real idea behind wanting to play our range a bit more aggressive pre-flop and take away these types of situations. But anyway, putting that aside, what do we think about 10s here? Well, I think 10's kind of an interesting hand. Our opponent now is not going to have a hand like queen 10 suited almost ever. They're not too likely to take this line with jack 10 suited anyway, but we do block a little bit of that. However, we can think of a few bluffs our opponent might have that we do block. If he had a hand like ace 10 suited, we want him to have that, right? And we have the pocket 10. So I think all in all, we are fairly reasonably high in our range. We can have a few jacks here for sure, but if we can have other middling pairs like 9s and 8s, well, we're probably going to have to go ahead and call.
How you been doing?
Yeah, fine.
How about in the game? Win?
No, lose. I'm VIP. Chinese VIP.
Wow. Rob Yong makes the correct call with pocket 10s. Incredible.
He's got a disappointed hand.
I knew you had that. Nice call.
Thank you for joining me for Poker Hands today. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you again soon.